Shalom, my dear friends. Shalom, and I do hope that you're able to both see me and hear me. We had been studying Rabbi Nachman's teaching about the good days and the bad days, and thank God the last week has been an example of the latter, with some very colossal difficulties over here from our office in Yerushalayim, finding it extremely difficult to connect with the rest of the world. We had been receiving messages last week that people were unable to access a zamra.org website. We also had messages that people who had been trying to contact us through email had actually been getting their emails sent back to them as undeliverable, and it did take some time until we were able to find out exactly where the problems lay, which apparently were with some strange changes to the name servers which our hosting company has been using, and until they admitted that they had not informed us that their name servers had changed, we were able to do nothing. But in the middle of the week we were able to make the necessary adjustments, which in turn take time to propagate across the internet. And until yesterday, some people were still complaining that they could not access the website, and I'm deeply sorry for the introduction that has occurred to our studies. And I do hope that today those of you who are with me will be able to follow the class to the end, that we will be able to broadcast to the end. We were not able to reach YouTube, to have YouTube confirm our zamra.org identity, which was yet another of our issues. But here we are, thank God, today, and hopefully we can return to where we had been before at our last session. Well, now, we have been studying Shir HaShirim, and that is what I would like to continue with today. First, to open our session with the next section of Shir HaShirim, and then after that we will come on, with the help of God, to the study of the Hebrew letters, continuing now with the letter Nun kefufah, the letter Nun as it appears when it is written at the beginning or the middle of the word, the Nun kefufah. And after that we will hopefully have time to return to our studies of Rabbi Nachman. So for now, without further ado, let us turn to Song of Songs. We are on chapter 6, verse 10, moving to today. I hope we will look at the verses going up to chapter 7, verse 2. It may be a similarly small number of verses, but there's quite a lot to discuss. So with that, let us, God willing, now proceed to our study of Shir HaShirim. Shalom, today, the 5th day of the month of Kislev of the year 5778, corresponding to the 23rd of November of the year 2017. Today we continue with our studies of Shir HaShirim, beginning today with verse 10 of chapter 6, and taking a look at the verses following that in the light of the commentary of Metzudat David. And in the previous sections, we had seen how the beloved had recounted her search for her beloved, having failed to get up for him when he arrived at her door. after she realized what she'd lost, she gets up and goes running after him, trying to find him in the city, only to be beaten and pushed by the guards. And that was what led the daughters of Jerusalem, to whom she was describing this, to ask her, well, what is so special about your beloved? And that was when she went into the very beautiful praise of her beloved. Adam, my beloved, is clear and ready. That is beginning in chapter 5, verse 10. And that praise had continued in her address to the daughters of Jerusalem to chapter 5, verse 16. And then the daughters of Jerusalem, beginning of chapter 6, ask her, well, where is he? Let's go with you. And she says, no, he's gone to his garden. He's grazing among the lilies, among the flowers. And because of her protestation of her love for him and her fidelity to him in chapter 6, verse 3, I'm my beloved's and my beloved is mine, that was what elicited his very beautiful praise of her, starting in chapter 6, verse 4. And that praise continues until chapter 6, verse 9, which is where we had reached in our study of the commentary of the Metzudat David, and that is what brings us into the praise that begins in the following verse, chapter 6, verse 10, Mizois hanishkofo kemo shochar, yofo chalavono bono kachamo ayumo kanidgolois, which, as we can see in the written parchment of Shir HaShirim, that one verse is one single parasha, although the printed Bibles do not all reflect this with the regular notation for a parasha. There is no pei or samach. Here it will be a samach, a parasha stuma. There's no such indication in there is at the beginning of the parasha, the beginning of chapter 6, verse 10, but the printed Bibles that I have seen do not indicate at the end that this is all one parasha by itself. Mizois hanishkofo k'moi shochar. Who is this who is shining forth, who is seen like the dawn? Yofo chalavono, beautiful like the moon. Borro kachamo, clear, translucent like the sun. Ayumu kanidgolois, she is awesome like the nidgolois, like the legions that are bedecked in their flags. Well, what we see in this single verse is a progression of stages of revelation and stages of development and growth, which in the Kabbalistic terminology would be termed as the stages of building of the partzuf. Here we are obviously seeing in our text an address that is speaking to Knesset Yisrael as the embodiment of the Sphira of Malchut. And we see in the successive phrases the building of the Malchut here, stage by stage, from first of all as the breaking of the dawn, and then the beauty is like the beauty of the moon, which is a paler beauty compared to the clarity and brilliance of the sun. And then finally, Ayumo Kanidgolois, she is awesome as the hosts with their banners. Well, who exactly is doing the talking in this verse? Is this the lover, or is this the daughters of Jerusalem? And it's an open question, as we shall see, as are some of the descriptions that are raised in the coming sections. Exactly whose voice are they said? So here we see Metzudat David on this verse, Mizos Anishkofa. Who is this who is seen down there from above? So it's the Metzudat David. This expression indicates praise, and it's an expression with the connotation of chashivut, of importance, of prestige and prominence. And the phraseology here is reminiscent of the phrase of Sarah to Abraham when she gave birth to Isaac, Mi milel le'Avrom, who could say to Avram that he would bear a son at this age, that his old wife would bear him a son. So the phrase, according to Metzudat David, is referring to the above. That is to say, the previous verse had ended with the daughters of Jerusalem, the queens and the concubines, all praising her. And now, this is what they say here in chapter 6, verse 10, is the praise elicited by the lover, by her beloved, the praise that was elicited from the daughters of Jerusalem and from the queens and the concubines of Shlomo. And it is they who are praising. This is what they say to her. How great and how splendidly prominent and exalted and important is she, this one who at the beginning she was seen and appeared like the brilliance of the star of the dawn, where the verse says, Mizos hanishkofa k'moi shochar. The shachar is the name of the morning star, which appears against the blackness of the sky prior to the dawn. And after that, she ascended further until she became beautiful like the moon. And we do know that the aspect of Malchut, the Sphira of Malchut, is considered to be a moon in relation to Ze'er Anpin, who is the sun that is shining to her. So we see the successive stages in the building of the Parzuf of Malchut, from the Nekudah, the single star in the black night, and then like the wider image of the moon, and then afterwards she adds to her beauty until she now becomes clear like the sun, in accordance with the prophecy that in time to come the light of the moon will be like the light of the sun. And this is an indication of her gadlut, the greatness, the mentalities of greatness of the Sphira of Malchut. Continues the Metzudat David, explaining now the mashal, not like other women whose beauty becomes weaker the more that they become old. He says here the Nimshal comes to tell us the greatness of this nation, that nation of Israel, that each and every time she adds more and more siagim and gedarim, these are fences and boundaries around herself, to keep her to maintaining her observance of the Torah. She adds one guardian boundary after another guardian boundary to ensure the observance of the Torah. And she described in the verse as Ayumo Kanidgola, is awesome like the banner bedecked legions, on account of her very great prominence, her greatness, her level. She inspires fear, puts fear upon all who see her. Just like the banners, the flags of many military camps swarming with soldiers in their legions, who would inspire fear on those who see them. And the Nimshal here comes to tell us that all of the nations do not really want to entirely destroy Israel, it's as if she consists of a great multitude of people who are highly skilled in war. We might say that the nations would like to diminish the power and the influence of Israel, but they do depend on Israel. The whole creation was for Israel. So now we move forward to verse 11. And this is here the lover speaking to her. Elginas egois yoradeti l'ois be'ibanocha l'ois apocho agefen henetzu arimonim, down to the garden of the nut trees have I gone down to take a look at the budding of the vale, the valley where the stream flows through, to see if the vines have come into flower, if the pomegranates have come into to their flower. So here, Elginas egois yoradeti l'ois be'ibanocha. There's an exquisitely beautiful pastoral evocation of the lover spending his time here in the orchards of the nuts, the groves of the nuts, having nothing more to do all day than to check out the flowers and the blossoms of the budding plants. Well, it's very important to understand who are saying these various sayings in these verses, so that we will keep track of the movement forward of Shir HaShirim. Here clearly in chapter 6 verse 11, this is the lover who is speaking. Rashi states this is still the Shekhinah, these are the words of the Shekhinah. I've come to the second temple to be with you. The garden is, Rashi indicates, an allusion to the second temple, as we shall see presently in the progress of Shir HaShirim. We're going through the history of Israel, and we've already had praises of her evoking the beauty of the first temple with its prophecies, which you see in the continuation. Now in the second temple period, there was no longer the prophetic voice coming from the temple, but there were other things, and these were alluded to in this verse. And let us follow through the commentary of Rashi on this verse before going forward to the Metzudat David, because the commentary of Rashi is very illuminating here. When it says, I've come down to the orchard of the nuts to look at the blossoms of the nachal, of the wadi, of the spring valley. He says he wants the lover, the Almighty, blessed be He wants to see what moisture of good deeds shall I see in you. It is the joy and the delight of the Almighty to come down to this garden, to this nut orchard, which is another metaphor for the Knesset Yisrael. He wants to see, has the vine come into flower? That is to say, are there students of the Torah, sages, students of the sages, Talmidei Chachamim, and Sofrim, and those who are constantly reviewing and repeating the Mishnah? Have the pomegranates come into blossom? These are those who observe the mitzvot, who are full of merits. And says Rashi, why is Israel compared to the nut tree? He says, just like this nut tree that you'd look at it and you think it's all wood, and we cannot see from the outside what's actually contained in these tough husked nuts. He says, but when you actually break it open, you find that it's full of the piles and piles of good food, the banks of the inner seed of the nut piled up one on the other. So are Israel, modest and humble. And the scholars and students of the sages with them are not necessarily visible and recognizable from the outside to tell, so that and they certainly don't boast and tell everybody about their achievements and accomplishments. But when you check them out, these people who appear from the outside to be nothing so special, but if you check them out, you'll find they're full of wisdom. There are many other midrashim on this verse, as we shall see, and hopefully we'll have an opportunity later on to come back to the midrashic levels of these verses. But here, there's suffice with Rashi's concluding words on this verse. He says, just like this nut falls in the mud, but even so, what is inside it is never spoiled, so Israel may go into exile among the nations, and they may take many beatings, and nevertheless their good deeds are never spoiled. Well, now to look at the Metzudat David on this verse. Erginas egos yoradati. These two are the words of the lover, who says, indeed, when I separated from her, I didn't go to hug the breast of a strange woman, to be in her, to embrace her. But all of my longings were only for her, for my beloved. And in order to give some expression to bring out this longing, to do something about it, I went down to the grove of the nuts in order to walk around and just enjoy there, and to receive the fragrance of the leaves of the trees, and to see the plants growing there by the bank of the stream, and to look to see if the vine had flowered forth, if the flowers of the pomegranates had grown. And the Nimshal is to say that even when Knesset Yisrael is in exile, I never chose any other nation, says Hashem, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be He. I'm to be found in the gardens, that is to say, Batei Knesiot, in the synagogues, Ubevate Midrashot, the study halls of Israel, to receive with favor the engagement in the exploring of new dimensions of the Torah, and to hear the joyous song of prayer. Well, now, she comes back to him in the following verse. Well, I never knew, she says, now referring to the episode where he had knocked on the door, and she said, well, how can I get up? This was, according to our commentators, alluding to the situation in the Second Temple, when he called her, but she didn't answer, she didn't come, and she says, Lo yodati, I just didn't know. Nafshi somasni markobois ami nodiv. Nafshi, my soul, somasni, did I place markobois as a chariot, ami nodiv, for my generous people. So she is saying here that she just did not know how close she was or could have been to him, and she missed the opportunity to look now at the commentaries of Metzudat David and also at Rashi on this section. The words of Metzudat David. Lo yodati, I didn't know. The chashukah, the beloved, goes back to her musing and her complaining and her mourning over the sad situation that had been caused. And she says, then I did not put my heart to pay attention to know what was going on, to be careful and properly cautious in respect to the honor due to the chashuk, to my beloved, to open for him the door immediately. I should have showed him that minimal respect when he came with his locks dripping from the moisture of the night. And instead, nafshi somasni, my soul, he says, is the subject of the word somasni. My soul, somasni, the verb being a third person, a singular feminine, somas, and then the suffix ni. My soul made me to be a chariot to be ridden by, to load the burdens upon me by the Nedive Am, by the free, the generous, the noble of the people. She wants to say that this was what caused me, because of my not realizing, this is what caused me to be subjugated and to be humbled before them, to be subject to the nations, just like one that sits all alone and isolated. And the Nimshal here, says Metzudat David, is to say that Knesset Yisrael is mourning, saying, well, I did not pay attention at that time, in the time of the Second Temple, to go out from Babylon, all of us together as God commanded. Only some of the people with Zerubbabel and Yehoshua the high priest, as recounted in Ezra chapter 1, and later Ezra himself, as narrated later on in the book of Ezra, only some of the people went up, but many stayed in Babylon, and that was her own causing her own misery. V'nafshi also saw, my soul, she says, made her to be subject to the other nations in exile. Well, now we come to chapter 7, verse 1. Shuvi shuvi hashulamis, shuvi shuvi v'necheze boch, matechezu bashulamis kemecholas hamachanoim. Come back, the Shulamis. Come back, and let us look at you. And the response, what will you look at in the Shulamit, the maid of Shulam, as in the dances of the camps? Well, this is a verse that on the surface appears to have very deep mystery, and we shall comment on this in a moment. Before we do comment on this verse, just let us look forward to the coming verses, chapter 7, verse 2 onwards, which will be continuing at the very least up till verse 7. And we shall be pursuing the ensuing development of this section. But in the verses from verse 2 through verse 7, we now see another praise of her. And the praise, as we shall see in the commentators, could be understood as being in the mouths of the daughters of Jerusalem. Or it could be, as it were, in the mouth of the Almighty, once again addressing her and praising her. One very notable feature of the coming section of praises of her is that unlike in the previous praises where he recounted her praises and where she recounted his praises, they all went from the top down to the bottom of the human form. But here in the coming section, starting with chapter 7, verse 2, Mayofu pa'omaich bana olim bas nodiv, how beautiful are your footsteps in your shoes. And then he goes up to chamik yorachayich, to the curves of your thighs. He will be going up subsequently from her belly and upwards, her breasts, up to her head again, from the bottom upwards. Well, this in itself will be subject of a specific discussion about what is the difference between those praises earlier that went from top to bottom to this coming phrase that goes from bottom to top. But before we come to that, we need to address another question, and that is, who is the Shulamit? Who is this Shulamit who is mentioned here? And obviously, according to the context, it would be the beloved, the Chashukah, the Knesset Yisrael, the Assembly of Israel, that has been the maiden that has been speaking and has been addressed by her lover and by the Benot Yerushalayim. And obviously, there is a deep connection between the Shulamit and Shlomo, who is mentioned by name several times throughout Shir HaShirim, in the very opening verse, Shir HaShirim LeShlomo, and then later on, Hinei mitato shel Shlomo, here is the bed of Solomon, and at the very end of Shir HaShirim, we come to Shlomo again, and the Shulamit would be linguistically related to Shlomo. She would be the completion and the perfection of Shlomo. Well, now, needless to say, among the vast waffle of candy floss that has surrounded Shir HaShirim in order to conceal its truth from those who casually look at it on the surface, there has developed a huge mythology about allegedly King Solomon's love life and who is this maiden. Well, to introduce the subject, first of all, let us look just linguistically at the name Shulamit. In the Torah, in the book of Leviticus, in the end of the parasha of Emor, we have the section of the Megadef. That's chapter 24, verse 10 of Leviticus. There went out the son of an Israelite woman who was the son of an Egyptian man among the children of Israel, and there was a struggle in the camp between the son of the Israelite woman and an Israelite man who apparently, according to our commentators, was actually a full Israelite with an Israelite father and an Israelite mother, and there was an Israelite who was the son of an Israelite woman, but his father was an Egyptian. This would make him an Israelite according to the law of matrilineal descent, but there was a problem in that not having an Israelite father, he was not assigned to any one of the camps of the tribes, and that was why there was this struggle. And the portion names his mother in chapter 24, verse 11 of Leviticus as Shulamit. Shalomit. That's not the same as in our portion exactly of Song of Songs. In our portion, the correct nikud, the correct pronunciation of the name is Shulamit. But here, with almost the same spelling, but not quite, and a different nikud, a different vocalization, the name is Shlomit. And this is practically one of the very few names of any of the women that went out of Egypt. And according to Rashi on the Chumash tells us this was the praise of Israel, that if it gave publicity to the name of this woman, that was because she was the only one who had questionable morality. And it is said that she was the woman that laid herself susceptible to the advances of one of the Egyptian taskmasters, who would send her actual husband out to work early in the morning and then come back to her house to carry on with her. And this son, who turned out to be the Megadef, the one that blasphemed the name of Hashem, was the issue of that relationship. And her name is given, as I said in the text, Leviticus chapter 24, verse 11, as Shlomit bat Divri. Shlomit, the daughter of Divri, the man of the word. And there is implicit criticism of her in our Midrashim, that she was called this way because she was called Shlomit because she would chatter with everybody and say, Shalom Alach, hello, peace be on you, without discriminating between who might be good and virtuous and who might be suspicious and in fact dangerous. And she was a bas divri, a chatterer, who would speak with everybody, and that was why she got to this bad state where she was involved in this forbidden relationship, which gave birth to this blasphemer of a son. So what we do see in this name Shlomit, however, is that she is expressing some side of the people of Israel that is indeed in contact with the nations of the world. And indeed we see in Shir HaShirim that the beloved also is with the maidens of the town, the village, with the Benot Yerushalayim, who are identified in the Nimshal with the nations of the world, just like Shlomit bat Divri had this kind of bad trait of talking to everybody. Well, now, another place in Tanakh where there is some kind of reference that to me seems relevant to our section is in the end of Samuel 2. The second book of Samuel has a section that comes after the Merid Avshalom, after the revolt of King David's son Avshalom, and after that was settled by the killing of Avshalom, as recounted in 2 Samuel. We have in chapter 20, there was right after this a new revolt, which was by somebody by the name of Sheva ben Bichri. This was considered to be a very dangerous revolt, and King David sent his chief of staff, Yoav ben Tzruyo, to deal with him, and they came to a town which is identified in our text, and this is a town where Yoav got the inhabitants closed up in a place called Avelo Bet Amaacho. This is in 2 Samuel chapter 20, verse 14, where they have Sheva ben Bichri finally holed up in this town, and Yoav ben Tzruya is about to destroy the whole town on account of this rebel against the king, this traitor. And that's when, in the siege, 2 Samuel chapter 20, verse 17, there comes forth, chapter 16, 2 Samuel chapter 20, verse 16. They're called a wise woman from the city, and she says, "Listen here, please tell Yoav to draw close that I may speak to him." And she tells him, "What, are you going to destroy this whole city just because of this one rebel? I will hand him over to you." Well, now, interestingly, in verse 19 of 2 Samuel chapter 20, verse 19, she says, Anoichi shalumei emunei Yisrael. I'm one of the perfect of the faithful of Israel. Shalumei, again the root of shalom, completeness. Shalumei emunei Yisrael, one of the complete of the faithful of Israel. Rashi on this verse here in 2 Samuel chapter 20, verse 19, he says, I am of the inhabitants of the city that are at peace with and faithful like the rest of Israel to the people of Israel and to the king. Well, now there is a very interesting midrash about this verse, that this woman was none other than Serach, the daughter of Asher, the son of Jacob. Well, that's a whole midrash unto itself, and how she could have lived for the many, many hundreds of years, and what all of that means, which we will not go into. But again, here she presents herself as the one that encompasses all of the faithful of Israel. And that will be another connotation to understand and accept here on Shulamit of the Shir HaShirim. Well, let's now look at what our Midrashim have to say about this name Shulamit. In the Midrash on Shir HaShirim, Rabbi Chanina tells us that 4 times in this verse is said Shuvi, Shuvi, return. These correspond to the 4 great exiles in which Israel was subjugated to the empires Babylon, Persia and Media, Greece, and finally Edom, who was joined up together with Ishmael. And she's called the Shulamit, says the Midrash, because she goes in under these empires in peace, and she comes out in peace. She succeeds in getting out. Well, now, likewise, Midrash Shir HaShirim has many other Midrashim on the name HaShulamit. Says the Midrash Shir HaShirim, what is the Shulamit? This nation that the peace of the life of the universes, of the Almighty, is the one that governs her. As it's written, God says when he tells Israel to build a sanctuary, I shall be going about in the tent and in the sanctuary. Israel is at peace with the Almighty. Another interpretation, what is the Shulamit? This is the nation that completes the blessing of Shalom every day in our prayers. And as the priests in the priestly blessing every day in the temple, they would say, V'yosem l'cho shalom, he shall put peace upon you. Another interpretation, what is the Shulamit? Says the Holy One, blessed be he. This nation that I am going to restore them in a dwelling place of peace. As the verse says, my people shall dwell in a dwelling of peace. Another interpretation, what is this Shulamit? Says the Holy One, blessed be he, this nation that I extend to her peace. As it says, I am inclining to her like a river of peace, verse in Isaiah. Another interpretation, what is the Shulamit? This nation that completes the survival and existence of the universe. Both in this world and in the world to come, Israel is vital, integral to the very survival and all the blessing that comes into the universe. Well, now, we shall see that the Metzudat David on this verse interprets the praise of Shuvi Shuvi HaShulamit as being in the mouth of the lover, the Holy One, blessed be he. However, as we shall see presently after we look at the Metzudat David, that this is not the opinion of some other commentators. There is a hint in Rashi that this could also be the nation speaking to Israel. But for the moment, let us look at the Metzudat David on chapter 7, verse 1, Shuvi Shuvi HaShulamis, when her saying in the previous verse was heard by the lover, her words, and according to this, he was interpreting that the garden of the orchard of the nuts, this was also her words speaking to him when the lover heard that his beloved was complaining and mourning and sorrowful that she had not been properly cautious in showing honor and respect to him. He now sends his words to her, again encouraging her, saying, you are the perfect in your attributes, your qualities, which are worthy, and you now return to me to be with me as you were then. And according to Mitzudat David, the words here are repeated, indicating the encouragement he is giving her, and he is trying to spur her on to come back to him. And then, according to Mitzvot David, the words "v'nechazeh bach," which is the first person plural, let us look at you, says the Holy One, blessed be He, according to this interpretation, I and the men of my household, that is the Familia shall mal, or the angels above, we shall look at and examine you in order to complete and fulfill your desire in everything that you might request. And then comes back the response, Ma techezu bashulamis. Here, Mitzudat David is interpreting that he, the lover, is continuing to speak. And he says to the men of his house, it's as if he is turning round his words to address the men of his house, to say to them, know what is this thing that you should be seeing in her in order to complete and fulfill her desire, to expand her heart in abundant joy, like the joy of the dance of the circles of the many camps. The Nimshal here, he says, it's as if Hamakom Baruch Hu, as if the Almighty, blessed be He, is saying to her, return from the exile to your land, and I, through the intermediary of the angels above, the supreme angels, we shall complete your desire with the returning of, bringing back of the holy temple, and with the division of the camps once again, of the Shekhinah, the Levites, and the Israelites as it was back then. That is to say, in the temple there were designated areas for the temple edifice itself, the actual structure of the house, which was allowed to be entered only by the Kohanim and not by anybody else. That is called Machane Shekhinah, corresponding in the sanctuary in the wilderness to the inner courtyard with the tent of meeting. Outside of that, the next sanctified level in the holy temple was the Machane Leviah, that is the areas of the temple that could only be entered by Levites, where priests could enter, and Levites too, but no Israelites. And then finally, in the camp, the area of the Levites, in the wilderness camp, this was the area surrounding the sanctuary where the Levitical families were encamped, and in the temple, this was the Har HaBayit, the Temple Mount, and the encampment of Israel was the rest of the Temple Mount and the city of Jerusalem. So that is what leads in verse 7:2, chapter 7, verse 2, Ma Yofa Pomayich, to the evocation of the pilgrim festivals. And with that, let us now turn to Rashi on our verses and a super commentator on Rashi to take a look at a different view of who is talking here. And Rashi says on the verse Shuvi Shuvi Hashulamis, chapter 7, verse 1, this is now the nations who are saying to Israel, this is her quoting what the nations are saying, Shuvi Shuvi Hashulamis, come back away from God. Come back from following him and come back to us. According to Rashi, it's the nations who are saying this. And they call her, according to Rashi, the Shulamit, because they know that Israel are complete and whole in their faith in God. Shulamit, from the expression of shalom. Shuvi, Shuvi, you come back to us. Let us take a look at you. Let us appoint governors and rulers from you. This is the Midrash of Rabbi Tanchuma, and another interpretation Rashi brings is, let us look at you to examine what greatness we should ascribe to you. We'll give you anything you want as long as you come away from him to us. And she says to him, and this is the continuation of the verse, Matechezu bashulamis, what will you see in the Shulamit? Says Rashi, what greatness can you possibly give to Israel which could be equal to the greatness we attained when we were at the dances of the camps bedecked with their banners in the wilderness at the giving of the Torah? So now, as we shall see in the continuation of the commentary of Metzudat David in our next session on the verses, chapter 7, verses 2 onwards, the praise beginning in chapter 7, verse 2 is in the mouth of the Chashuk, the lover, the Holy One, blessed be he, according to the interpretation of Metzudat David. However, Rashi goes in a different direction, and this is brought out in the Siftei Chachamim, the commentary on Rashi, the super commentary on Rashi, where he says that the following praise from chapter 7, verse 2 onwards is not a regular praise of the beauty of a woman. In the previous praises, in the earlier chapters, it is her beloved who is praising her. And now, however, says the Siftei Chachamim, identifying who is the speaker in chapter 7, verse 2, he says, this is her companions. This is her companions who now start praising. They're beginning to get it. They're beginning to understand what is so unique about her, understanding that her uniqueness is that she won't go with anybody except him. Her uniqueness is her absolute loyalty despite the tests which they submit her to, and now they are beginning to get it. Says the Siftei Chachamim, this is the interpretation of the more exact manuscripts of Rashi, and so it is fit to be that this verse is going back to what had been written beforehand, where they had said to her, we want to be with you, well, let's go with you after him. And according to this would then help us to understand why this coming praise from chapter 7, verse 2 onwards goes from bottom upwards. That in chapter 7, verse 2, that this then moves into the praise of the Holy One, blessed be he, for Israel. In other words, the words of chapter 7, verse 1 are, according to Rashi, in the view of Siftei Chachamim, in the mouth of the nations, and then the Almighty begins to praise her in chapter 7, verse 2, we shall say that we shall see that the Metzudat David considered it's all the words of the Holy One, blessed be he, all overladen with many, many levels of meaning and significance. And with the help of God, in our next session, we will come to the ensuing a beautiful praise of Knesset Yisrael, no matter in whose mouth it is coming from. So with that, my friends, we will have a brief interval before continuing presently with our studies of Aleph Bet. I'll be back in just a few minutes. Shalom, my dear friends. Let us now continue with our studies today in the Mishnat Sofrim on the letter Nun kefufah, the bent over Nun. Shalom, today the 5th day of the month of Kislev of the year 5778, corresponding to the 23rd of November 2017. And today we come in our study of the Hebrew letters as written in the Sefer Torah, the Tefillin and the Mezuzah, to the letter Nun kefufah. The letter Nun, as it is written, kefufah, bent down, bent over, as it is written at the beginning or the middle of a word. And the letter Nun does have the two forms. It has the form of the Nun Pshuta, which we will look at in the session after this. And the Nun Pshuta, actually, the straightened Nun, which is not bent over, looks rather like an extended version of the mother letter of both forms, the mother letter of the Nun, which is really a Zayin. We know that the letter Nun in Gematria corresponds to 50, and the letter Zayin corresponds to 7, and 7 times 7 is 49, and with one extra unit added for the entire concept, we have therefore a numerical relationship between the letter Zayin and the letter Nun, which, as mentioned, does take the form of a Zayin, with the leg or the stem or the pillar of the Zayin now being bent in this way so as to form a base upon which the Nun is sitting. So let us now turn to the Mishnat Sofrim of Chafetz Chaim, where he speaks about the laws relating to the writing of the letter Nun in the Sefer Torah and the Tefillin and the Mezuzah. And he writes on the Nun kefufah, the letter Nun kefufah must have a head which is the same as the head of a Zayin. In other words, the head of the Zayin is squared, and it sits on top of the leg in the middle of the head. The middle of the head is like a head sitting on its neck, and the head of the Zayin, as we have already studied, has 3 tagin. The letter Zayin is one of the letters Sha'at Nezgats that have the tagin on the letter, and so is the letter Nun. Sha'at Nezgats, Shin Ayin Tet, Nun Zayin Gimel Tzadik, all have the maklot, the three spears or poles on top, making up the crown. However, the length of the base of the Nun has to be sufficient to enable the letter to be written with the extended base. That is to say, the entire Nun together, if its leg were written straight, the entire height of the letter Nun would have to be 4 kulamusim. It would have to be 4 breadths of the nib from top to bottom. When we write the Nun kefufah, what we are doing is taking the Nun pshuta and bending around the base. So the overall height of the Nun pshuta would be a minimum of 4 kulamusim, 4 breadths of the nib, but when the base is curved under it, so it's sitting down. And this is also, let us remember, somewhat reminiscent of the letter Gimel, which sits down in its characteristic way, except the difference between the Nun and the Gimel is that the base of the Nun is written in one continuous line, whereas in the letter Gimel, the letter Zayin is written with an angle to the right at the bottom, with an extra foot, as it were, on the left-hand side. So the basic height of the letter Nun has to be 4 kulamusim, but then with the base bent over underneath. So now continuing with the laws of the writing of the Nun, if the scribe had made the letter Nun too short, I'm sorry, I've thoroughly confused issues here, and I'm going to have to start again with the laws of the Nun from the Mishnat Sofrim, because I have been reading to you from the laws of the Nun Pshuta, the long Nun, but talking about the bent over Nun. Again, to begin at the beginning. The letter Nun kefufah has to have a head like the Zayin, which has to have 3 tagin on it, and it must not be wider than the head of a letter Zayin, because if the head of the Nun was written too wide, it would start looking as if it was a bet. And therefore the scribe must make sure that he does not make the roof of the Nun, the head of the Nun, too wide, so that the letter will not become to resemble a bet, particularly if the scribe were not to place the head of the Nun bang in the middle, with the neck in the middle of the head. But if he were to write the head of the Nun like the head of a Vav, which would have no angle on the right-hand side, there would be a danger that the letter could, if the head of the Nun was extended too far to the left, it could easily look like the letter Bet to a child. And now for that same reason, to avoid the letter looking like a bet, where the roof of the bet extends to the left exactly as far as the base of the bet, specifically the letter Nun has to have a base that extends further to the left, out further to the left than the left-hand edge of the head of the Nun. And this is once again to distinguish the letter Nun from these other letters that it might otherwise resemble. And likewise, another possible confusion, if the head of the Nun was extended too far to the left, it could also conceivably start looking like the letter Chof, which would also make it invalid. Now, the neck of the Nun, as it's drawn down, it should be in the middle of the head. And it should be somewhat thick and long, and it should also be, it's the custom of our Sofrim today to angle the neck of the Nun somewhat to the right-hand side. And there is a reason why the scribes do this, because they want to be sure this enables the base of the Nun to not extend too far to the left, even though it's extended further than the head. And it's this device of angling the base of the angling the neck of the nun to the right, that enables another letter written by its side to be written closer to it. The letters of a word in the Torah must not be too far apart. They must be seen to be part of a continuous text, and this device of angling the leg of the nun to the right enables a letter coming after the nun to be written much closer to it than it would be possible if the neck of the nun were going down perpendicular without being angled to the right and still needing to have an extra long base of the nun to avoid the letter appearing like the letter bet or the letter chof. Now, from the outset, the scribe should endeavor to write the right-hand corner of the nun curved. Now, there's a big question about what would happen if indeed the scribe did, instead of making the letter nun out of a Zion, if he made the head of the nun curved on the right-hand side like a Vav, and with the neck not in the center of the head, but at the right-hand side of the head. And this is problematic because there are opinions that actually a valid form of the nun would be writing it not with the head of a Zion, but with the head of a Vav. This is not the way that we today write the nun, but if the scribe did write the head of a nun like that of a Vav and not like that of a Zion, there's a question about whether it can be corrected in the tefillin and the mezuzah if the scribe had continued writing the letters afterwards. And the answer is that if the scribe were to have done this, and he created his nun out of the head of a Vav, he would have to start scraping away the top left of the Vav before he starts adding ink on the right-hand side to put a squared head of the Zion. He would, in the tefillin or the mezuzah, be able to correct a letter nun that had been written with a head of a Vav, but the only way he could do it would be by first defacing the form of the nun by scraping away the ink on the left-hand side of the head, and only then beginning to add ink to the right-hand side to extend the head to the right hand of the neck. And this is bound up with laws that specifically apply to the Sofrim, and let us hope and pray that our Sofrim will write their Sifrei Torah correctly according to all of the proper laws. So with that, my friend, let us now take just a very, very brief interval, a minute or two, before I come back to talk about our teaching in the Likutei Moharan that we have been studying, and we'll go back to it despite these many interruptions. I'll be back in a very short time, God willing, with our studies of Rabbi Nachman Likutei Moharan. Shalom, my dear friends. Shalom. I hope you can still hear me and see me. As I did mention, we have had astonishing obstacles over the last few days, and it's been very difficult to get on top of all of this. It does show what a very delicate infrastructure we have in our present day culture. We do enjoy these amazing things like the ability through internet for regular, small, ordinary people like myself to be able to communicate with people literally across the world. But if the system goes down, the system goes down. It's very fragile, and perhaps this comes to encourage us to remember that everything indeed is in the hands of the Almighty, and we cannot assume that technology is always going to work. We do, of course, every week from before sunset on Friday till after the stars come out on Saturday night, take a complete break from the active use of all of our modern technology through our observance of the Shabbat. But at times, even during the week, things do go wrong. Well, I would like, rather than going forward in the very brief few moments we have left to us today, without going forward in our text on Rabbi Nachman, just actually to relate what's been happening to us in our attempts to study to the main theme of Rabbi Nachman's teaching, which is Mi ho'ish hechofetz chaim, who is the person that loves life and who wants to find the good. And Rabbi Nachman taught us we have to look for the good. There are the good days, as in the verse in Proverbs, B'yom tov hayei b'tov, or v'yom ro'o re'ei, B'yom tov hayei b'tov. On a good day, be in the good, enjoy the good, draw out the good. Or v'yom ro'o, when there's a bad day, re'ei, you have to look and search for the good in that day. Here there's a profound lesson about time and the preciousness of every moment. Not at every moment are we in a state of aliyah. Indeed, much of our day is bound up with our pursuit of all the things we have to pursue in the material, the physical world, just to maintain our existence, from our daily work and daily feeding ourselves, washing ourselves, cleaning ourselves, to filling out our tax forms and all the other things we have to do just to not fall behind in this world. And we have to keep our sights on our true goals, but never to let the obstacles that may surround us on the bad days to swerve us entirely away from our goals, because that's why we are sent the bad days. It was really the responsibility of our illustrious original ancestor Adam and Eve, who were not satisfied with the blissful world of Garden of Eden they lived in, and felt constrained to have a taste of the tree of good and evil, and that's precisely the cause of the bad days. They, by eating and tasting the tree of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, they got to know the bad days where godliness is concealed behind the husks of the klipot. And this is what has kept me going. It was very tempting over the last days to say, well, these are bad times, but they're not bad times. There's no time that is a bad time. And I've been studying Rabbi Noson's monumental work, Likutei Halachot, the work by the outstanding student of Rabbi Nachman, Rabbi Noson of Breslev, in his Likutei Halachot, where I'm currently in the laws of Choshen Mishpat, the laws of business dealings, and all kinds of legal issues in the halakha that might arise from taking loans and failing to repay them. And it's in one of these laws that Rabbi Nachman discusses our teaching at length, Likutei Moran, Part 1, Torah 33, and tells us that people often see their financial situation as being one that would lead them to judge these as being the bad days. And he says that's what leads people to saddle themselves with debt. They think that now is a bad time and they can't make any money. They'd better take a loan against hopeful future income. But then when the future income comes, they find themselves even deeper in the world of the husks if they have not the wherewithal to repay their loans. And Rabbi Nosson says to us that when the times do appear to be not good, that is the time to specifically search and find all the true blessings contained in this time. Well, I'd like to wish my dear friends of you who are in the United States of America a very wonderful Thanksgiving weekend. This for us is a kind of practice for Hanukkah, which comes now in just 3 weeks' time. We shall already, today in 3 weeks' time, we shall already be in the festival of Hanukkah beginning on Tuesday night, December the 12th. And Thanksgiving of the United States of America is a kind of practice and rehearsal for the true days of Thanksgiving of Hanukkah. There's so much to be thankful for, even when we do have obstacles, and we believe that the obstacles are only sent in order to steel us and strengthen us to with a will to serve the Almighty. With that, my dear friends, let me wish you from Jerusalem Shabbat Shalom U'Vorach, a good and a blessed Shabbat. And I look forward to being with you, God willing, the continuation of our studies on this coming Sunday. And for now, then, let me wish you from Yerushalayim, Hemshech Yom Tov, continuation of a good day. Let this be a good day. Let us find and manifest the good in the day and have Shabbat Shalom Vorach, a good and a blessed Shabbat. And let us hope that we will, in the coming days, be able to continue with our studies without further interruptions. Shalom from Yerushalayim.